My in-laws forced me to sign a prenuptial agreement before marrying their daughter. Now that I'm worth 5 times more than they are, they want to nullify it, even going so far as to file a false report against me. 8 years ago, my wife and I got married. Before the wedding, my in-laws decided I had to sign a prenup. At the time, I found it a bit insulting because they had already made it clear I wasn't really welcomed into their family. Signing the prenup felt like another blow. Back then, I worked in sales. A year into dating my wife, I decided to quit my job and start my own electronics brand. We were both 27 at the time, and when I officially launched my business, I was almost 28. My wife supported me throughout the process and was overjoyed when I began pursuing my dream. Her parents, however, weren't happy. They assumed I was living off their daughter's money. While she did support me to some extent, since I didn't have a stable income yet, I wasn't entirely dependent on her. At 29, I proposed, and we married within the year. But a few months before the wedding, her parents approached me with a prenuptial agreement. It stated that in the event of a divorce, all assets and finances would remain separate, and I couldn't claim anything of hers, and vice versa. Additionally, I would have to reimburse my wife and in-laws for any financial support they'd provided while I was building my business. This reminder of my supposed debt to them felt unnecessary. The prenup even included a clause that neither my wife nor I could claim each other's assets. If we ever had a joint account, the funds would be split according to who contributed more. Her parents assumed my wife would be the primary earner throughout our marriage. They told me signing the agreement was the only way they'd feel comfortable accepting me as their son-in-law. I found it deeply insulting for 2 reasons. First, they assumed I'd always depend on my wife and never succeed on my own, even though I was working hard to build my business. Second, they had disapproved of me from the start. When my wife introduced me to them, they believed I wasn't good enough, meaning not wealthy enough, for their daughter. For context, my in-laws run a successful real estate business and come from affluent families. My parents, on the other hand, had regular jobs. My dad was a high school football coach, and my mom managed a local cafe. I didn't struggle financially growing up, but I didn't have the kind of wealth my in-laws were used to. Their disdain was clear from the start: sarcastic comments, cruel jokes disguised as humor, and a generally condescending attitude. I stayed silent about it because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they got under my skin. My wife often defended me, but I believed ignoring them was the best strategy. I knew my wife loved me, and that was enough. Despite feeling insulted, I signed the prenup. My wife was offended when they presented it to us, but she signed it too, knowing their true intentions. They hoped to humiliate me before the wedding or scare me off altogether. But they failed. We got married and have remained a strong team ever since. Fast forward to today, my business has grown significantly. In the past 2 years, it experienced exponential growth thanks to effective social media marketing and hard work. Now, I'm worth 5 times more than my in-laws. Suddenly, they want to dissolve the prenup. A few days ago, they visited us for dinner. After our child went to bed, they brought up the idea of nullifying the agreement, saying it was the right time to involve their lawyers. My wife and I were shocked. I refused, telling them they insisted on the prenup to feel secure about me joining their family, and I didn't want to take that away from them. They were clearly unhappy, but tried to argue that times had changed. We now had a child, and there was no longer any reason to doubt me. Still, I stood my ground and said I wasn't willing to discuss it further. Their tone shifted, and they grew agitated. They said that since the prenup was their idea, I had to respect their wishes and dissolve it because they deemed it unnecessary now. They even claimed their age and experience gave them the right to make such decisions to prevent future issues. I had no idea what they were talking about. After some back and forth, I stated plainly that my wife and I weren't planning to divorce, so there was no need to revisit the prenup. I urged them to drop the matter, but they refused. The conversation escalated, and years of unresolved tension erupted. I pointed out that the prenup was designed not out of fairness, but to humiliate me and emphasize that I didn't belong in their social class. Now that I had surpassed them financially, they wanted to pretend the whole thing never happened. They countered by claiming it was only meant to protect their daughter from someone who might exploit her financially. The argument dragged on until I grew too exhausted to continue. I asked them to leave, citing the late hour and the fact that our loud disagreement could wake my sleeping son. I just wanted peace and quiet to process everything. They took offense, accusing me of being ungrateful. They argued that I wouldn't have achieved my current success without the support of their daughter and them. This was where I had to set the record straight. I acknowledged that they had occasionally sent money in the early days of my business, but that support was never for me. It was for their daughter. We could have managed without their help, as I had savings, but my wife occasionally needed their financial assistance for her personal expenses. Emotionally, they never supported me. They never made me feel like part of the family, so I told them they had no right to claim credit for my success. This only made them angrier. They accused me of being disrespectful and dismissing their contributions. At one point, they even turned to my wife and demanded she choose between them and me. They claimed they had done everything possible to support our marriage, but could no longer stand my ingratitude. Eventually, my wife managed to calm the situation and convince them to leave. She has stayed in contact with them since, trying to get them to apologize. I've told her I don't need an apology. I just want space. They can maintain a relationship with her and our child, but I have no interest in mending things with them after what happened. Recently, my wife shared something that made the situation even worse. While trying to reason with her parents, she discovered they were trying to manipulate her into divorcing me. She showed me their messages, and I was furious. The messages claimed I didn't respect her family and, therefore, didn't truly love her. They suggested that my refusal to dissolve the prenup indicated I distrusted her, especially now that she had financial independence. They painted me as ungrateful and advised her to rethink our marriage before it was too late. Thankfully, my wife doesn't believe any of it, but she's exhausted from trying to make them see reason. The only point my wife somewhat agrees with is that, reluctantly, they did support us financially in the early days when I was starting my business, and she was covering all our expenses. However, I don't feel the need to acknowledge that support because it was clearly done for their daughter, not for me. If my wife had let me, I would have used my savings to contribute back then, and we wouldn't have had to rely on them at all. Besides, they always made sure I felt unwelcome in the family, treating me as though I was only with her for the money. Now I wonder, am I the bad guy for refusing to thank my in-laws for supporting us when I was starting my business? Update 1. It's been a week since the argument with my in-laws. Based on what I've read so far, opinions about my situation seem divided, but I've already made a decision. I'm going to pay them back for all the financial support they've ever given us. I've calculated a rough figure, and I want to settle the debt. I don't want to feel indebted to them or be constantly reminded of it. I've discussed this with my wife, and she agrees it's a good idea. Her parents haven't stopped trying to convince her to divorce me, claiming I've disrespected them multiple times. This, despite the fact that they've never acknowledged how they've disrespected me and my family on numerous occasions. If they can't handle being treated the same way they've treated us for years, then they had no right to behave like that in the first place. Honestly, I was quite polite at the start, even when the argument escalated. But with them, it's always been outright hostility towards me and my family. They've never even pretended to like us. At this point, both my wife and I are drained from dealing with this situation. Hopefully, writing them a check will resolve everything. Normally, I don't believe throwing money at a relationship issue is the answer, but with them, it might be the only way. They're that materialistic and self-centered. I can't imagine other parents trying to ruin their own child's marriage, especially when a child is involved, just because their ego matters more than anything else. I'll keep you updated once we take this next step, but I hope it finally brings some peace to our lives. Update 2. Earlier today, my wife spoke with her parents and told them I was willing to write them a check to put an end to this entire situation because it's becoming exhausting for both of us. Since all of this originally started over money, we thought paying them back for everything they'd done for us in the past might resolve things. But of course, it didn't. Instead, they were offended at the mere suggestion that they could be bought. They told my wife that this was no longer about money, something that seems bizarre considering how they acted during our argument, where it clearly seemed to be about money. Now, all of a sudden, it's about the respect they claim I've never shown them. Honestly, I find this ridiculous because I could say the exact same thing about them. My wife and I genuinely have no idea what they're even talking about. I've always been polite and civil toward them, while they've consistently had a bad attitude toward me. I've literally never disrespected them. Yet, they believe this one instance of me refusing to acknowledge their so-called support is somehow equivalent to the years of disrespect they've shown me and my family while exploiting my love for their daughter. It's not the same at all. Even my wife agrees at this point. Fortunately, they're not speaking to me directly anymore. They're only communicating through her. My wife is fully on my side, but they're still trying to manipulate her into divorcing me. Now, they've even started saying she needs to protect our child and begin taking steps toward gaining custody. It's absurd. I can't believe they're stooping so low. Trying to ruin our marriage wasn't enough for them. Now they want to drive a wedge between me and my child. And all of this is just for their own ego. Honestly, this behavior alone is enough for me to feel that they don't deserve any respect at all. This kind of treatment is what I've dealt with since the day I met my wife, and seeing them try to destroy our family like this only reinforces everything I've ever felt about them. I'm grateful that my wife is standing by me, but at this point, I don't see any way to move forward with them. Update 3. It's been a little over 2 weeks since the fight with my in-laws, and in the past few days my wife has stopped responding to them. She feels it's a lost cause. She did everything she could to explain to her parents why they were wrong, but they kept insisting she should divorce me. She got tired of trying to fix the situation on her own, especially since they made it clear they weren't interested in reconciling. So, she stopped replying to them entirely. As a result, they decided to show up at our house today. I was the one who answered the door, but they completely ignored me, walking right past and calling for my wife. At this point, their behavior doesn't even surprise me anymore. After accusing me of being disrespectful, they continue to act like hypocrites. I didn't say anything and just waited for my wife to come out. When she did, she immediately told them she wasn't interested in speaking unless they were willing to acknowledge our perspective. Instead, they claimed they were there to confront her about her behavior, saying she was starting to act like me, becoming more disrespectful. They even went so far as to say that because I was in debt to them, she was too, and she shouldn't forget it. That's when my wife lost her patience and started yelling at them, and rightfully so. She told them she had never asked them to do anything for her, and that they had no right to hold it over her head since everything they did was by their own choice. If they hadn't wanted to help, they could have refused, and we would have made it work without their assistance. She pointed out that other parents help their children out of love, not to later use it as leverage as they've done. As for gratitude, she reminded them that we've always tried to be thankful and respectful despite their ridiculous behavior toward me and my family. We stayed silent for years to avoid drama and keep the peace, but now, it's impossible to stay quiet. She told them respect isn't something that can be demanded. It's something that's earned, and they've done nothing to deserve it. The argument went on for a while. I stayed silent, not wanting to engage with them. Eventually, when my wife started getting more upset, I stepped in to calm her down. That's when my in-laws shifted their focus to me, blaming me for everything. They claimed it all started because I refused to dissolve the prenuptial agreement. I corrected them. I told them this didn't start with the prenup. It started when they decided to treat me poorly simply because I wasn't from the wealthy circle they expected their daughter's partner to come from. That's what's been bothering them all these years and why they've always mistreated me. I explained that I tolerated it for so long. because I didn't want to cause unnecessary problems, but they needed to realize they couldn't keep getting away with it. That's why I refused to dissolve the prenup, because I'm not going to be their puppet. The situation got even more tense after that. They started shouting, saying awful things, and trying to provoke me, but I stayed calm, which only made them angrier. When they realized they couldn't get a reaction from me, they told my wife she had to choose between them and me. That's when my wife made her stance clear. She told them she was choosing her family, her husband, and her child. She told her parents to leave our house and that they would receive the check soon, after which we'd be done with them. Her parents were visibly shocked. They clearly hadn't expected this reaction. They probably assumed they'd have another chance because that's how it's always worked in the past. But both my wife and I have had enough. When they tried to continue arguing, my wife threatened to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Finally, they left, and since then, we've blocked them on all platforms. We're officially cutting them out of our lives. It's going to be difficult to explain to our child why he won't see his grandparents anymore, but thankfully, he has another set of loving grandparents in his life. Maybe reconciliation will be possible someday, but for now, this is the best path forward. We've tried everything to make things work with them, but it's clear they only want things to go their way, which is no longer an option. Honestly, I feel relieved. Both my wife and I stood up for ourselves, and it feels like a huge weight has been lifted off our shoulders. We're happy we faced the situation head on. Update 4. After 2 months of no contact with my in-laws, my wife and I were trying to move on with our lives. However, things took a shocking and far more serious turn a couple of weeks ago. My in-laws filed a false report against me, accusing me of child abuse. I can't begin to describe the horror and disbelief I felt when Child Protective Services showed up at our door. As with any allegation of this nature, it was taken very seriously. CPS decided to temporarily remove my son from our home while they conducted their investigation. Those were the darkest days of my life. Watching them take my son away while I was powerless to stop it shattered me completely. He was crying, begging not to leave, screaming that he wanted to stay with his parents. There are no words to capture how devastating that moment was. Fortunately, the social workers conducted a thorough and fair investigation. They quickly realized the accusations were baseless. The bruises my in-laws mentioned in their report were the result of a fall my son had while playing, completely normal for a child his age. Doctors confirmed there were no signs of abuse or mistreatment. A few days ago, we finally got our son back. The relief we felt was overwhelming, but the anger runs just as deep. For our son, it was a traumatic experience. When he returned, he wouldn't let go of us and tearfully recounted how he told the social workers he just wanted to come home. I cannot believe my in-laws were capable of something so despicable, using their own grandson in their absurd vendetta against me. As if that weren't enough, this scandal has also hurt my business. Even though the allegations were proven false, the damage was done. News spreads fast, and my company's reputation has suffered. I've lost several important contracts, and some clients are questioning whether they want to continue working with me. Despite the truth being on my side, the stain left by these accusations isn't easily erased. It's infuriating because I've worked so hard to build my business, and now it's being jeopardized by their malicious actions. At this point, we're not letting this go. Filing a false report of this magnitude and taking a child from his parents is something we cannot and will not overlook. I've been consulting with my lawyer, who happens to have a friend specializing in cases involving defamation and false accusations. We believe we have a strong case to sue my in-laws for the personal and professional damages they've caused. This isn't just about me or my wife anymore. It's about what they did to my son. No child should have to endure what he went through. My wife fully supports taking legal action. After everything we've been through with her parents, this was the final straw. She's enraged and deeply disappointed in them. They've robbed her son of his peace and tried to destroy our marriage repeatedly. Despite the difficulties, my wife has stood firmly by my side. Now more than ever, We're united in our decision to see this through to the end. Update 5. After 9 long months of battling in court, I finally have good news to share. The journey has been exhausting and stressful, but it's been worth it. First, let me address my business. Despite the chaos of the past months, my company has managed to recover quite well. While it's not back to 100%, the fact that it's grown during such a challenging time is a positive sign. I'm optimistic that with time and continued hard work, it will return to where it should be. The loyalty of my most steadfast clients has been instrumental. While I lost some contracts, many others chose to stick with me, trusting that the truth would prevail. Now for the big news. We won the lawsuit against my in-laws. Words cannot fully express my satisfaction with the outcome. After everything they did, justice was on our side. The judge ruled in our favor, and my in-laws have been ordered to pay a hefty 6-figure settlement, so close to 7 figures that I know it will hit them hard. They'll likely have to sell their vacation home to cover the payment, since they don't have that kind of cash readily available. The irony is that if they'd accepted the check I offered months ago, they would have been far better off. But their pride and need for control drove them to push too far, and now they're paying the price, literally. What could have ended peacefully and reasonably turned into a very expensive lesson for them. With this settlement, we'll recover the losses my business suffered and hopefully teach my in-laws to think twice before interfering in our lives again. Our son is also starting to heal from the ordeal. We've been taking him to therapy to help him process everything he went through. Thankfully, he's resilient, and we're doing everything we can to ensure he feels safe and loved. If there's a silver lining to all of this, it's that my in-laws will likely reconsider any future attempts to meddle with us. For now, my family is focused on moving forward, stronger and more united than ever.